Good day and welcome to this bite-sized training video. Today's focus will be specifically on variation. By the end of this bite-sized session, you should have an understanding of what is meant by the term variation, including its origins in quality improvement, the different classifications of variation and how this relates to healthcare, the different sources of variation and how this relates to healthcare, the cost of variation and how to tackle variation in the workplace. Given the car manufacturing company Toyota played a large part in developing lean ways of working, many of the QI terms we see today originate from the Japanese language. Mura is the Japanese term or word for unevenness, non-uniformity and irregularity. Service improvement usually starts by removing waste in the process altogether. The focus then shifts to making the necessary work more efficient by reducing the variation in the system. In healthcare, we experience a wide variety of variation in our patients, staff, the equipment we use and the environment that we work in. Developing and planning services with variation in mind and attempting to reduce that variation where possible can result in more efficient work processes and reduced overburden in our systems. Variation can be split into two classifications, common cause and special cause. Common cause variation is expected and predictable. It is inherent in the process itself and always present. Special cause variation is not expected. It occurs in an ad hoc and unpredictable fashion, and it is usually caused by factors external to the process itself. Now let's apply this to an everyday example. If I am travelling to work using the same route every day, I expect some variation in my travel time, depending on how many traffic lights I am required to stop at and how much traffic is on the roads at certain times of day. If I plan to experience traffic on the roads because I travel at peak hours, and to stop at all sets of traffic lights en route, then I can avoid being late to work. The traffic lights and the traffic on the roads would be considered common cause variation because they are expected and can be planned for in order to minimise impact on my arrival time. Now let's consider a circumstance whereby I wake up and find that my car tyre is flat, or that the traffic on the roads is at a standstill because of a bad accident. This would be considered special cause variation because it is not expected and occurs in an unpredictable fashion. I therefore cannot plan as effectively for these events happening, and it will likely impact on my arrival time in a negative fashion. The image above provides some healthcare related examples of common cause and special cause variation for you to consider. Let's consider the three different sources of variation. Positional variation is where there is variation within an individual sample. Put simply, if I were making cookies, I might find that the cookies at the back of the oven were well done in comparison to those at the front of the oven. In healthcare, we can think of this as variation in care between the first patient of the day and the last patient of the day. For example, is more time spent with patients at the beginning of the day? Are patients at the end of the day more likely to be cancelled or rushed through their appointment? Cyclical variation is where there is variation between samples. If I were baking cookies, I might find some variation between batches, such as how crunchy or soft the cookies were. In healthcare, we might experience cyclical variation in quality and amount of care provided on a Monday in comparison to a Wednesday, particularly if the service does not operate over a weekend period and there are part-time staff who do not work on a Monday when demand for service is high. Shift-to-shift variation is where there is variation between samples but over a larger time frame. If I were baking cookies, this might be different lengths of cooling time due to climate conditions for cookies baked in summer months, or daytime hours in comparison to winter months or nighttime hours. In healthcare, we might experience shift-to-shift variation in relation to quality of care provided in winter months versus summer months. Finally, There may be variation in the level of patient complexity and common conditions treated in comparison to what we have seen in the past and will see in the future. It is important to consider the implications of variation on healthcare provision. Variation in our patients, staff, processes, environment and equipment could lead to inconsistent outputs or performance, inconsistent waiting times to access services, complaints and safety incidences, cancellations, cultural implications, for example, ill feeling between services if some are more overburdened than others, or reduced staff well-being. So how do we begin to tackle variation in our healthcare services? Most companies chase KPIs and targets, but if we have lots of variation in the process, what we should chase is the variation. If we do this instead, the target will look after themselves because variation in the system means more accurate and consistent outputs. There are 4 principles to keep in mind when attempting to chase and tackle variation. Number 1. Control the inputs, not the outputs. In short, this means don't chase the patient outcome, instead control what needs to go into the patient's journey to enable a successful outcome. For example, ensuring that you have the right number of staff with the right knowledge and skills, the necessary equipment, which is accessible and in working order, adequate space and admin support. All of this will ensure that the output and the patient experience is better and more controlled. The second principle is that variation going into a process will result in variation coming out of the process. This means that if we have lots of variation in our staff, our patients, equipment, the environment and processes, then we can expect variation in quality of patient care and outcomes. In essence, chaos going into care provision will result in chaos coming out. The third principle is to focus on eliminating the variation first, then hitting the target second. If we work on reducing the variation in our patients, staff, processes, equipment and environment, this will result in better patient outcomes and impact positively on our targets and KPIs. Finally, the fourth principle is to work on the process, not the product. Our focus should be on the process steps instead of the process output. In healthcare, this would require focusing on how care is delivered rather than the patient outcome. But what does reducing variation look like in practice? Some things you might already be doing to control the impact of variation on quality of care are as follows. Ensuring that the complexity of patients and knowledge and skills of the staff are matched. Providing longer appointment slots for more complex patients. Introducing standard work so that all staff are following the same and most efficient and effective process. When rostering staff, ensure that there is an adequate skill mix per shift. Introducing standard equipment in departments and between departments to prevent errors, delays in care and enhance staff well-being. To summarise, variation in our patients, staff, equipment, processes and environment can cause waste. In order to improve performance, variation should be minimised. There are 2 types of variation, common cause and special cause. And finally, don't focus on targets and process outputs. Instead, work on controlling the inputs to a process and the variation within the process. If we do this, the targets and outputs will look after themselves. If you have any questions in relation to variation, please reach out to the Leadership and Improvement team on the email address shown. They will be happy to support your learning journey. You can also learn more about the various improvement tools and techniques through our Continuous Improvement programme, which includes a variety of bite-sized, half-day and full-day training courses. Many of our courses are now CPD accredited, with many more to gain accreditation in the near future. Go to Strive Events for the most up-to-date course information. Thank you.